Welcome, everyone, to the first edition of the Metal Exchange podcast. I am your host, Justin Kramer, and along with me for the ride this week and every week is Chris Nietzsche. How you doing, bud?
Good. How are you?
I am doing great. Because this is obviously the first time we're doing this, I want to give the listeners a real sense of what it is we are doing each and every week here on the Metal Exchange. Each week, we are going to take a deep dive into one of a classic heavy metal or hard rock disc, or possibly even a new hard rock and heavy metal disc each and every week, just to give the listeners a sense of what two average Joes think of the album. We'll include links to the albums where you can actually hear the material, where you could buy merchandise, if you like what you hear. Obviously, we want to support the bands as we do this each and every week. And I guess just as an introduction, why don't we give a little bit of information as to who we are and basically how long we've been listening to this stuff.
Yeah, let's do it. Me and you have been friends since, I don't know, 1996 probably, and I think the music kind of came up to our doorstep probably in the following year. I think is where we really started to pick up on power metal and progressive metal, and it's only just exploded for us over the years since then.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Just to go back a little bit, I had been listening to bands like Metallica and Megadeth and Tool going back to as early as late 1994, early 1995, but I had never heard of power metal or progressive metal or death metal or thrash metal. That was all, or real obscure thrash metal. That was all foreign to me. I had never heard anything like that until 1997, as you said. And just by way of introduction, we're going to be getting into one of the classic progressive metal discs, Fates Warning's 1994 release, Inside Out. And when I had the idea for the podcast, I actually asked you to pick the first album, and you had picked this album, which was a surprise to me because knowing your bread and butter and what it is that you like, I was surprised you didn't go with a power metal disc, which is kind of like your bread and butter, your forte, whereas I'm more of a prog guy. I think you're more of a power metal fan.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I just look back at this album and as much as I love power metal, I definitely have a warm spot in my heart for prog metal, and Fates Warning is probably at the top of the list as far as prog metal bands that I've loved over the years. And this album, at least for me, served as an introduction to that band.
Yeah, totally. This was a gateway in a number of ways. I think it would be very, very cool to kind of share how it is that we first got exposed to Fates Warning and this album in particular. And I guess I'll let you do the honors and talk about the mixtape.
Well, in 1997, I was turning 15 years old, and I had a friend I went to high school with named Ralph, and we would just sit together during lunch and talk about stuff. And I recall going over to his house and hearing a song here, a song there. And then I remember it being Chance by Sabotage from their Handful of Rain album, which also came out in 1994, just blowing my mind. And I remember sitting at the lunch table and saying, Ralph, you don't have to get me anything for my birthday, but could you just make me a mixtape? And yeah, I'm probably dating myself a little bit when I say mixtape, but of all this metal stuff that you listen to, because I'm interested to see what it's like. And so he made this tape, and it had Helloween and Stratovarius and Angra, but also prog bands like Fates Warning and Shadow Gallery and Rush. And the first song, he put two songs, both from Inside Out. One was Outside Looking In, and the other was Monument. And I knew that based on those two songs, I really wanted to hear the rest of the album and listen to more of Fates Warning from that point on.
I couldn't agree more. There were two. I loved that tape right away, and I had the pleasure of listening to it around the same time that you got it. And when I heard it, there were two tracks in particular that just jumped out at me right away. The first was Black Diamond by Stradivarius, which is the antithesis of what we're going to be talking about today. But when you hear the keyboards at the start of that song, I had never heard anything like it. It took the parts of Metallica and Tool and the heaviness that those bands, or at least at the time that I thought the heaviness that those bands had, but with the melodic the melodic interludes that I had just never, ever heard before. And that's what had me hooked initially. That was the first track. The second track was Monument by Fates Warning, which is obviously the perfect segue into Inside Out. Monument, to this day, is one of my favorite songs. And no matter how many times I play it, it never gets old. It's a song that is a quintessential progressive metal song. And without further ado, I guess let's get into Inside Out and really kind of take a dive into this album. As I stated earlier, it came out by Fates Warning in 1994 during the summer. It has 10 tracks. It totals about 48 minutes in length. And this album is kind of during a transition period for the band. And the reason I say that is the early Fates Warning albums sound nothing like Inside Out. Nothing. The first 3 discs had a different vocalist. Obviously, John Arch was singing for them at the time. They came out with 3 albums that were really more of like an Iron Maiden, heavy metal, power metal influence there. And they were great, but it was just very, very different. But as the lineup changed in and around 1987, when John Arch left the band and Ray Alder joined, they really went to more of a progressive sound. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of, I've said this to you before, but I feel like for them, if they wanted to let the world know that they're going to start heading in the direction of progressive metal, the 22-minute Ivory Gate of Dreams song from the No Exit album in 1988 was their way of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, they were progressive elements in those early power heavy metal discs, but they blew the doors off. They came out with a vengeance to basically tell the world we're going in a different direction. As of the Ivory Gate of Dreams, that is a classic song, and from there, as they moved into Perfect Symmetry and as they moved into Parallels, they got a little bit more of commercial sounding in their sound, in the sense that I think they wanted to definitely appeal to a wider audience, but the progressive roots were obviously firmly entrenched at that point. And as one would argue that Parallels is actually their most accessible disc, in the sense that you can turn it on and right away you just fall in love with some of the hooks in that album. But as we get into Inside Out in 1994, they've really tried to strike a chord with the progressive audience.
Without a doubt. I mean, you look back at like Perfect Symmetry and Parallels, and you have songs like Through Different Eyes and Point of View and Life in Still Water, and they're just like very crunchy, very like toe tapping, just catchy. And I totally agree with you, that whole like radio friendly, accessible sound without straying too far from that kind of Fates Warning, style. And as they move into Inside Out, it was as if they were saying like, let's try to do something a little bit more progressive, a little bit more mid-tempo songs, a little less of that kind of crunchy, like toe tapping, radio hit type songs. It's a way more like, it's a mellower experience. And it's definitely a lot more progressive. I think like after the opening track, Outside Looking In, which is kind of in that vein of like a really like crunchy song, it starts to go into just a more kind of just chill atmosphere with, Pale Fire and The Strand. And it's like they kind of like almost hit that like that heavier rock kind of fast paced with like songs like Shelter Me, but like it's just that they don't like quite get to where they were on those previous albums, I feel.
I would agree. I'm not sure if it was a concerted effort on their part or if it was just that they were trying to go in a little bit of a different direction. But just by way of change. Parallels comes out in 1991. Hair metal is in its kind of waning days at this point, but that album, because of the catchiness and almost the beautiful simplicity of it, it has those hooks that you mentioned. But as we get to Inside Out, they've definitely kind of slowed things down a little bit, and I don't want to say that it's more simplistic, because it's not. It's actually more progressive, but it's just not as it doesn't have those hard rocking anthems that I think that they had on some of their earlier releases, and that's what makes this album particularly interesting, because Outside Looking In really is by far the hardest rocking track on the entire album. And then from there, every other track is kind of like a mid-paced, mid-tempo. There are some heavy sections of songs, but by and large, it's a lot more of a progressive rock album in many ways.
Absolutely. I mean, I look at a song like Island in the Stream, which is just a really beautifully written, I guess you could call it a ballad. Just a really beautiful, kind of a slow it down. It's kind of, to me, like, it's definitely a highlight to me for this album, even though I love a rocker like Outside Looking In, and I love like a really good progressive song like Monument. But Island in the Stream is just this beautiful ballad, and we had the pleasure of seeing them perform it live at Prague Power 10 in 2009, I believe it was, and I was so excited that they broke out that song. I wasn't really expecting to hear it, but that was such a treat getting to hear that song live. Just something like, just almost like, we're gonna like take it down a notch and play this, kind of ballady, like, it's just such a great song. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, it is a great song, and it really is kind of like the ballad on the album, and it's, I think, a fitting spot to have it as the fifth track, because it really is kind of just sets the pace, because the first four tracks are a little bit catchier, a little bit harder in the grand scheme of things. But then by the time you get to songs like Down to the Wire and Face the Fear, it almost seems like Island in the Stream was a transition into the second half of this disc. And I'm glad you brought up the Prague Power show. We've been going to that festival since 2002, I guess at this point, for the better part of 20 years. That Fates Warning headlining show, it was September 12th, 2009. That show that you referenced, to this day, is one of my favorite all-time sets, not only at that festival, but one of my favorite sets that I've ever seen. Part of the reason, of course, is that they pulled out a classic like Island in the Stream, which I never heard or I never expected to hear live. But the rest of that show, it was the band is so tight and was just so on point. And if I recall, they actually closed the entire show with The Ivory Gate of Dreams, which was another song that I just never expected to hear, let alone all 22 minutes of it. It was just, it blew me away. And I've had the pleasure of seeing them live on a number of occasions, and they really are one of the tightest, best sounding live bands I've ever seen. And once in a while, they do just really kind of throw a curveball in terms of what tracks they include. I reference, I saw them back in 2015 at a little club in Brooklyn, St. Vitus Bar, still there. Really, really tiny room. And at that show, they broke out and they played Pale Fire as the second track of the set. I was not expecting that. And it was just another just real gem for me as someone who's been listening to this album for the better part of 25 years.
Well, you always got to love when a band that's been around for as long as they have and have such an expansive catalog could throw a bone to some of the, the longtime fans that are interested in hearing a deeper cut at a live show every now and again, instead of just hearing, the hits over and over again, which some bands are guilty of doing when it comes to putting together a set list. It's nice to know that you can go see Fates Warning and you might just get to hear a diamond in the rough.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that a lot of bands more and more are falling a little bit of into that trap of just playing the hits to get the people in the door. And because there's certain songs that people obviously want to hear, but at the same time, as you get deeper and deeper into a catalog, longtime fans kind of crave that one-off that you're just not expecting. A Pale Fire, an Ivory Gate of Dreams, an Island in the Stream. So to longtime fans such as ourselves, it was really a treat to hear some of those tracks. Chris, if there was one track that you would recommend that people really take a listen to, if they've either never heard Fate's Warning or they've never heard this album, which track either stands out to you or is the must listen on this album?
For me, I mean, it's always going to come back to Outside Looking In. For me, it was the first Fate's Warning song I ever heard. It still stands up to this day. It's a real rockin' song. I still listen to it, and when I hear that opening riff to the song, I just get the goosebumps. It just reminds me of what made me love heavy metal when I first heard it. And I just have to mention Island in the Stream again, like two songs that are on completely opposite ends of the spectrum, but both just a real great representation of how varied Fate's Warning is as a band, even on just one album. So I'd say Outside Looking In, and then Island in the Stream a close second.
You can't go wrong there. I will go with the quote-unquote commercial pick, and I will go with Monument. And the reason I go with Monument is just because, again, when I first heard that particular song, that was what hooked me onto progressive metal, and it's why it's still my favorite genre to this day. Not that songs like Pull Me Under and those other, classic, quote unquote, classic progressive metal songs aren't great. They are phenomenal, and I could listen to them every single day. But Monument was the song that really bridged the gap between what I was listening to and what I would begin to listen to every day for the next 25 years. And for that reason, I have to give that song the nod. If you are listening to the whole album, the track that immediately precedes Monument, Inward Bound, is an instrumental track. And I think it was purposely placed there as almost like an introduction to the song. And they really do work exceptionally well together. Although Monument as a standalone track obviously is fantastic. But with that introduction, it is a perfect intro into not only this album, but into Fate's Warning in general, especially what they've been doing since Inside Out.
Absolutely. It's this just like very haunting, very harrowing song that kind of leads you right in. I almost feel like you have to listen to it. If you're going to listen to Monument, you should just listen to that 2.5 minutes of intro. And I think that overall, like our choices are pretty much going to set the table for what like our tastes are going to be on this podcast going forward. You're going to probably lean towards more progressive type stuff, and I'm going to lean more towards power type stuff. But the fact that we both like both types of stuff, just one more than the other, I guess, it should make for some interesting conversations going forward.
Totally. And I think that as we get deeper and deeper into our selections, I think that we're also going to have some surprises in terms of as we branch out to some other genres, either stuff that you may not be as in tune with or stuff that you may not have heard in a long time, or conversely, stuff that you may never heard of all. I think that it's going to make for a very interesting dialogue, and we'd love to get your thoughts in the captions that you'll see that come with the podcast. We invite you to join us on our Instagram, our Facebook page, and we'll plug those at some other point. But we'd love to have you join in the dialogue and get a sense from you, the listeners, as to what your favorite tracks are, what you think of the album. And obviously, if there's any albums that you'd like us to cover going forward, we'd certainly welcome those comments. I just have a couple of other things I want to say about the album. Track number 7 is a song called Face the Fear. And it was really a track that I didn't pay too much attention to when I first heard the disc, not because I didn't like it, but just because I thought it was overshadowed by other songs. And to a certain extent, I still feel that way. But as I listen to it, I think it actually sets the table for what this band would become on their future albums. And by that, I mean, Fate's Warning has been releasing albums consistently since Inside Out. They came out with A Pleasant Shade of Grey in 1997, which to many is their magnum opus, which is really one long 12-song track that clocks in at about an hour, which is just a progressive metal masterpiece. But after that, they've released albums every 4 or 5 years since then, give or take. And I think a song like Face the Fear actually sets the tempo and the mood for what they did on every other album going forward. And it was almost like they found this formula that they not only liked, but that the fans appreciated, and they just took it and they've been running with it ever since. And that's not a knock against them for not deviating, because the tracks are very, very different. And and I look forward to their new release, which is due out, I believe, in a couple of weeks. Long Day, Good Night. But it to me, as I listen to these albums, it seems to always come back to that Face the Fear type formula. Would you agree, or am I totally off base here?
No, I would definitely agree with that for sure. I think like Pale Fire is another song, like you mentioned before, is kind of in that vein as well. Just kind of,
Definitely.
yeah, like I would definitely agree. I guess if you were going to say that, like Fates Warning's signature sound, like that, since the late 80s, early 90s, when they became more of a progressive band, I would say that you pretty much hit the nail on the head.
And the only other thing I would say is that what really stood out to me about this disc, and then I'll throw to you for some final thoughts on the album, but Mark Zonder's drumming on this disc to this day blows me away. I don't understand. I don't understand not only where he got some of his fills from, but really where some of these ideas came from, in terms of every single song is just, it's almost like a masterclass in drumming precision, at least to my ears. And let me be clear. I don't play the drums. I don't play the guitar. I'm a fan, right? I'm the guy who listens to the disc, and I know what I enjoy, and I know what maybe doesn't appeal to me as much. But I thought his drumming on this disc deserves special recognition for how awesome it sounds.
Absolutely. I would also just want to mention that, you want to feel like you want to be able to feel like 1994 wasn't that long ago, but we're talking about 26 years ago. The production on this album is really, really well done. Like, sometimes you get that kind of like mid to late 80s disc, like where it's not loud enough, or it's not bassy enough, or it just doesn't sound very good. This is, probably a time where production is getting much better overall in the music industry, but I think it's just like worth pointing out how good the production is on this album. Probably Fates Warning's best production up until that point.
Oh, I without question. And it's funny because I listened to the original recording when I kind of went back in time, and I went back in the time machine. This album was actually re-released and I believe remastered in 2012. I have not heard the original recording. I should say I haven't heard the remastered version, because in my opinion, it didn't need to be done. That 2012 release does come with a lot of cool stuff, and we'll get briefly into that. But the actual album itself sounded so good and still holds up so well that I don't even know that the actual album itself needed to be remastered. Still, though, check out the 2012 release, because it comes with a second disc of live tracks and demos. It comes with another DVD, which includes 8 or 9 tracks from the album, obviously live, and then a number of cool extras on DVD. So it's definitely worth checking out. But I've never actually heard the album in its remastered form. To me, don't mess with perfection, and this is one of the best easy for me to say, best mixed albums of that kind of like mid 90s progressive era.
Absolutely. I definitely recommend the DVD extra. It's a live show way before I think anybody had any clue that there was going to be these DVD concert releases years later. It was, if I recall, I think it's just like one camera on a tripod set up, and they just filmed them during one of their shows during the Inside Out tour. And I mean, it's not going to blow you away as far as quality goes, but I mean, if you want to just see what the band was like playing in that era of 1994, 1995, it's definitely worth checking out. I know I bought that version of the album just for the DVD. I didn't really need a remastered version, like you said, of an album that was produced pretty darn well from the get-go. But I'm always a sucker for a DVD being thrown in so I'll gladly buy an album I have already just to get, some DVD, extra stuff, live concerts, things of that nature. It's definitely worth, if you're going to buy the album anyway, you might as well get all the treats that come with it. It also has, that bonus disc also has some of the original demos from the recording and some of the live tracks they did. There's a very cool live version of the 11th Hour on there. So if you don't have the album and you're thinking about getting it, that's probably the edition that you'd want to go with if you just want to really get that full 1994 Fates Warning experience.
And it also includes Circles, which is an unreleased track that was basically on their Chasing Time best of, but it was the only place to hear it prior to this re-release. It's a fantastic B-side or unreleased track, if you will. I guess that leaves us with one other question, really, which is the old what do you rate the album? And we'll use a 1 to 10 scale, obviously, just to make things a little bit simple. 1 being don't waste your time, and 10 being a absolute perfect album that you wouldn't change a single note on. What are your thoughts? Where does Inside Out Fates or I should say, where does Inside Out kind of land in the Fates Warning pantheon? And then, of course, just in general, what would you rate this disc?
Well, for me, I mean, I am forever going to go back and forth between Parallels and Inside Out as my 2 favorite Fates Warning albums. I just think that, though different, they both really represent what Fates Warning is all about, from a real just catchy toe-tapping songs like Point of View to just like a super like emotional ride that Island in the Stream is. So for me, like, that's pretty much as good as it gets when it comes to Fates Warning, in my opinion. From a scale of 1 to 10, to me, Inside Out, I wouldn't call it a perfect album, but it's pretty damn close. I give it a 9.0 out of 10.
Nice. I'll say this: when I grab, or when I have limited time with all the new releases, and obviously wanting to check out stuff that maybe I haven't checked out in some time, this is not the first Fates Warning disc I usually go to. I usually either go to Parallels or A Pleasant Shade of Grey, and I'm not sure why that is. It's just, for whatever reason, those are the ones that I seem to go back to. So and even though I've listened to this disc hundreds of times, I think that I had some preconceived notions as to what I thought I was going to think about it, not having heard it in some time. And I kind of thought I would go into it, because I do have such fond memories of the album, that it was going to be about an 8. But I got to be honest, after having gone back and listened to it, it actually is even better than I thought, or at least better than I remembered it. And it's not so much because of songs like Monument or Outside Looking In, which are 10s. Those are perfect songs, but it's because some of those lesser tracks, such as A Shelter Me or An Island in the Stream, those tracks are just so good, and I just missed hearing those songs, that to me, the album is a solid 8.5, and I can't recommend the album enough. And I do think it's a very good album if you've never heard the band, to really just kind of immerse yourself into what they have been doing, really for like I said, for the better part of 2 decades now. So to me, it's an 8.5 from me, a solid 9 from you, and it's a fantastic listening experience. I look forward to their new album. Like I said, I believe they have a new album that's set to come out somewhere in November 6th, I believe. I heard the single from that, and it just reminded me of a little bit more punchier version of what was otherwise on this album.
Agreed. And they definitely are just one of those bands where I still look forward to when they come out with a new album. Like, it's because I it's gonna be good. Like, they just don't make bad albums.
Yeah, they're consistent, almost to a fault, in that they've raised the expectations of the listener, that they expect something great every time they release an album. Which, again, they're not a band that's releasing an album every 6 months, so it is a treat every 4 or 5 years when you get the new disc in your hands. And I'll say this, I think you picked a perfect album to really start the dialogue, and really as a launching point for the Metal Exchange podcast. And I know that this week you would ask me, Justin, I pick something for next week, and I'm happy to do that. But I think we're going to go in a little bit of a different direction. This is, as I said, a progressive metal masterpiece. But next week we're going to go into a classic speed metal or power metal album that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle just because of the massive discography and that this band has. And I know that, without even saying the name of the band, this is one of, if not your favorite power metal band, and it's certainly mine as well. And we're gonna go back in time to the Walls of Jericho album by Helloween. We're gonna listen not just to its original release, but we're gonna listen to basically all the bells and whistles that came along with Walls of Jericho, or at least now that comes with it, with the Judas EP and everything else. And I think that this album is really going to be a nice transition and a nice contrast to what we got to hear this week with Fates Warning.
Yeah, I would say contrast is the right word there. I consider myself to be something of a Helloween historian, having run the or helped run the Future World website for many years. There was a time in my life where I could not get enough information, song lyrics, who wrote what song. When it comes to Helloween, they're without a doubt one of my all-time favorite bands, not just power metal or metal, but just all music. So discussing their first major release is super exciting for me, and I'm looking forward to going back and listening to it again, because I'm not really even too sure when the last time I sat down and listened to Walls of Jericho start to finish. It's probably been a while, and it's funny. I have memories of buying the CD, and I'll tell that story on next week's episode. But yeah, that's a great choice, and I really do. I look forward to listening to it again and talking about it with you.
Yeah, it's funny. We would have been having these conversations anyway, but we might as well put it out there for you, the listener, to kind of critique and just get your opinions as well, because we were having the conversations anyway, and we thought that there might be some interest in having other people hear what our thoughts were as just two fans. So without any other delay, we will turn it over next week to Walls of Jericho, and we thank you for tuning in.
Thanks again, Justin. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, bud. Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.